Talk about, shall we, this cancel culture law. This is Bridget Phillipson, Piers. What has she taken it upon herself to do?
This is the Education Secretary.
Yes,
she's the Education Secretary, and in November, an Act of Parliament was passed, a Freedom of Speech Act, particularly aimed at universities, colleges and students' associations to protect freedom of speech. And Bridget Phillipson, and it's had the royal consent. It's on the statute book, and the law was due to start in the next day or two. But it does need implementation regulation, which she's declined to give, and has said she's going to repeal it. Now, she said all this outside Parliament. She has taken it upon herself, effectively, to repeal an Act of Parliament without the consent of Parliament. It wasn't in the King's speech. And also, this is basically saying it's fine, let's have all this wokery-pokery back in universities and cancelling speakers.
This is why the government brought it forward.
That's why
so many people were being cancelled.
Absolutely.
People
and
like
now
J.K. Rowling, people like that.
Incredibly, the Labour Party have decided to repeal a freedom of speech bill. It is absolutely unforgivable. I mean, Bridget Phillipson, who's also responsible for the ludicrous VAT on public schools, which she's now admitted does mean there are going to be more pupils and more pressure on state schools.
Of course there are.
Instead of actually improving education in this country, everything she seems to be doing is damaging it. And more than that, nothing was mentioned in the government about the £250 billion of liability for student loans we have, much of which will probably never be repaid. That's a liability this government isn't even focusing on.
Why have they done this freedom of speech thing?
Well, the whole thing is, first of all, they haven't repealed it.
But she says she's going to.
Well, what she says is she doesn't think the Act itself is fit for purpose.
But Parliament passed it.
It did indeed. So, I mean, on the basis of that, she wants to look at it again and see if that can be improved.
But she stopped it being implemented.
Stopped it being implemented.
Which is, I mean, that is beyond law, beyond Parliament. It's a kind of dictatorship stuff we're getting here.
Well, she says it's too burdensome. She said the legislature would have imposed a burdensome duty on universities to uphold free speech.
Yeah.
I don't care how burdensome it is, they need to uphold free speech.
Free speech is vital.
But it's the cornerstone of this country.
Absolutely.
I think all of us around this table can agree free speech is the right thing. People shouldn't be cancelled in universities. Point here is you've got to make this work properly. So one of the concerns, for instance, from the Jewish community was that you might get extreme anti-Semites speaking at universities, which would be a problem for Jewish students. So what you're talking about here is how you put certain safeguards in place. Free speech is not unlimited. Free speech carries with it the duty of responsibility, and if the law doesn't work properly to guarantee that, then it needs to be reviewed.
But she's decided off her own bat
that's what I'm saying.
that the law it isn't fit for purpose when it's been passed through Parliament, it's on the statute book, it's had the royal assent. This business was not mentioned in the King's speech. Actually, neither was taking away the money from pensioners for the heating allowance. I mean, it's what isn't in the King's speech is the most sinister thing about this government already.
It is curious that a Secretary of State can just say, I'm not doing it.
Well,
no debate in Parliament. She just said it's happening.
And she said it outside Parliament.
Parliament.
What she can do is she can review it and see if this can be improved. Right. I mean,
she hasn't reviewed it. She's stopped it.
Well, I mean, she stopped it being implemented at this moment in the same way that the Illegal Migration Act also passed through Parliament, and that's been stopped in its tracks. So there's nothing.
But we knew that was going to happen because they said they were going to block the Rwanda immediately.
They were going to do that.
We knew nothing about the freedom of speech.
No, I mean, this has come out since they've actually been elected.
There's an irony here, Nigel, that the whole thing about freedom of speech wasn't mentioned at any point during a general election campaign for 6 weeks. We were all talking about they never mentioned it once this was going to happen.
The King's Speech came about after they were elected as well, and this was not mentioned in it.
No, but
I think freedom of speech is a fundamental issue.
No, but I agree
and this is...
we're on the same side on freedom of speech, but do you also agree, Piers, that it has to actually be implemented with careful thought?
I do. That's why the law was passed in the first place.
Yes,
and if you listen to Toby Young on this subject, he's very good on it.
Through properly, that there were anomalies in it. That
it was thought through properly.
It was the kind of speakers who might appear at university, whether or not you'd end up with some hate speech as a result of this. All those things weren't taken into consideration, and what Bridget Phillipson is saying is, let's do that now.
They were taken into consideration. They debated it. I mean, this is
and some
crazy.
Of the academics who've been no platform to saying that they're really disturbed by this development.
Yeah, I mean, Kathleen Stock would be an example that she lost her career because of her views on transgender issues, and I think that she was incredibly badly treated. So the principles behind this, I'm agreeing with.
Right.
And as far as I can gather from from the reports, so is Bridget Phillipson. The point really is making this law work properly.
I mean, Bridget Phillipson is only second to Ed Miliband in the disastrousness of her spoutings so far. I mean, she's also the woman during the election who said they were going to reduce, Labour would reduce violence against women by 50%. Now, again, pluck a figure from the air. She has not explained how. That wasn't in the King's Speech, by the way, and she mentioned this more than once. She went on about it, and we still haven't heard how she, as Education Secretary, is going to reduce violence against women by 50%.
They've confirmed, haven't they, Nigel, that they are going ahead with this flagship bill
in January
to strip private schools of their VAT. Now, I saw to impose VAT on private schools. And I saw a figure the other day saying they're not going to get anything like the money they thought. And I know for a fact grandparents who've raided the bank to pay their grandchildren's school fees for 3 years to avoid the VAT hike.
Yeah, and obviously there will be people who are affected by
and others
this.
who are taking their children out as well.
Yeah, but I mean, the general principle behind it has got to be right on the basis that most parents will stump up that 20% extra, assuming they're charged it. Some schools may use the donations they get to not pass on the fee. But over the last 20 years, school fees have gone up 55%. The same proportion of parents are still sending their children to private schools. That's 7%. So money doesn't seem to be an issue for most people.
Public schools fund their own teachers' pensions, which is not the case in state schools. That's the reason, one of the major reasons that the costs have gone up in private schools, or public schools as we still quite rightly call them. And also, the point is public schools are bastions of educational excellence. And instead, and what Bridget Phillipson is doing is penalising already great, famous internationally, some of our great assets are our public schools. She's penalising them out of spite, socialist spite of the worst kind.
State schools also ought to be bastions of excellence.
But you don't achieve that by punishing the children of the families who have either saved or worked really hard or aspiring to private schools.
It's the worst kind of...
6,500 more teachers.
It's the worst kind of socialist...
Which will help the state school sector.
It's such a nonsense figure. Where are they going to find these 6,500 teachers? Nobody wants to do it as a job.
It takes a few years to train them.
Yes, it won't happen round the corner.
Exactly, but in the meantime, you're taking children out of schools who have got a settled life in a school, and sometimes those kids are in those private schools, not because their parents are wealthy, but because they might have learning needs and they need a smaller classroom.
And they'll be protected.
Or they were bullied. No, they'll only be protected if they've got a statement. They'll only be protected if they've got an educational healthcare statement. And a lot of kids are not that challenged.
Well, you've got to have some...
That they have the state already paying their fees. And those kids are only protected because the state already pays their private school fees. What I'm talking about are the kids with dyslexia or a bit of ADHD or a bit of autism. And they can exist in a school.
And should have been statemented on the basis of that.
So that means the government paying more people's... Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but
you can't pay everybody's school fees. So the children who have statements are the ones who have more extreme disabilities.
Yeah, who are protected.
But there
and
will
also
be those
special
children.
schools would be protected as well. They won't have to pay
Yeah, but the government
20%.
already pay their fees.
But actually,
if you have a child
children of the armed forces and diplomats who had fee assistance in public schools, that has gone. She has cancelled that. And
there are state boarding schools.
It is absolutely outrageous.
A tiny number.
We have an education secretary who's anti-education.
Military school in Dover, whereby the kids from the armed forces can go. It's a boarding school, so if they're posted overseas, they can go there. Those boarding fees, although there is no fee for education, those boarding fees are paid for.
By us. And that's okay.
Well, by the taxpayer, yes,
exactly.
of course, because
but what
we're
you're
asking our
talking about
soldiers
is
to go abroad and serve the country.
Totally agree. And in that situation, absolutely, of course, we should be helping those families. But what you're talking about here is, well, if you've got a child with any learning needs at all, go and get them statemented. Once you've got that certificate that says my child can't be in education, the government will then pay that child's private school fees. Do you see what I mean?
See,
so, like, the ideology of it is more and more, go to the government, they will pay for
all the parents. All the parents who are paying school fees are also paying taxes towards state education.
Yes,
so
and it is their choice to do this.
Exactly. It is their choice. So why should the general taxpayer have to subsidise that?
They're
choice?
Not subsidising it.
We're all subsidising
rubbish. That's completely untrue.
Of course
you're now penalising them and taking money off people.
We're subsidising it by allowing them to avoid 20% of VAT. That money has to come from somewhere else,
but
and that will be the general taxpayer.
The parents
Nonsense.
of children at private schools are subsidising the state sector, because children at private school, they aren't taking
but they're making that choice for themselves in the same way.
And that's okay, because you know what? I like a country where you have a choice.
I quite like parents to have a choice.
But why should everybody else have to pay for that choice? If you want,
they're not paying for it.
If you want private health, you can have private health. That's fine. Spend the your money as you wish. Everyone should have the right to do that. Other people shouldn't subsidise it. Private health is not subsidised by the general taxpayer.
But they aren't.
Neither is private school education, and to claim it is nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
They are businesses, and if they're not paying VAT, that money has to come from elsewhere.
And it's children.
And they also do some very important work in local community. There are also lots of bursaries for children from poorer backgrounds. That's all going to go, Piers. All going to go, because that'll be the first thing they'll cut, will be the bursaries for the kids.
Well, when you talk about health as well, and private health, something that for a long time I've believed we should be doing is I think it's 400,000 people from abroad come to take advantage of our private health service. Why don't we tax them? And use that money to go into the National Health Service.
Anybody who comes to live here from abroad must pay the NHS surcharge.
How many do?
Not if they're using private service. They're not living here. I'm not talking about people living here. I'm talking about people who come specifically just for special private medical treatment. And there are hundreds of thousands of them. Yeah. If we charge them £10 for each procedure, we would be raising millions for the National Health Service.
We're starting to see, aren't we, what life under a Labour government looks like. And I think this idea of less choice, Nigel Nelson, we will be coming back to this.
And the nanny state.